Good morning. It is Sunday morning, March 13th, 2022. And today we are doing paper dyeing two different ways. The first way we are going to demonstrate is with food color dyeing, but we will set our ink nibs for alcohol dyeing to soak at least overnight.
Where are we? My goodness. We are using an overhead rig. And if the camera shakes, I sincerely apologize for that. But let's just press on. So we're doing paper dyeing today. And the two methods we're going to experiment with is first alcohol ink. It's not a manufactured alcohol ink, it's a DIY alcohol ink, and it's nothing more than rubbing alcohol and children's markers. Here's the result. This is sprayed on. It's sprayed on to wet paper, and you can see there are varying results in dye absorption. It has to do with what the paper is made out of versus how long the paper is in the dye. So let's look at some full-size sheets, and the striping in this first example is because this was one of the ones that was laying at the bottom, and it was laying on a drying rack, a baking rack. So up here you can see there's some squares, and then the rest of it just striped out. And here is the effect that everyone oohs and ahs over, and that's this sort of concentrated abstract. This is what happens when you dry your papers too fast. I don't know if it happens in the oven. I've seen reports that it does, but I used a fan to dry my papers, and it pushed the dye to one end. And here it is again, although we've got some bubbling, and that has to do with the alcohol in the ink. This is the one that everybody seems to want to get. They love this effect, and I can tell you it was either the first or second one in the spray dye bath, and these lines here are from peaks and valleys in the paper. More than that I can't tell you, honestly. That's just the way it came out. And then now the green ones on book paper, I didn't do book paper for blue ones. The green ones came out in varying rates of absorption. You can see this one is not very much, and this one's not very much. Again, it has to do with what the paper is made out of and how long the paper is in the dye bath. So here we have two where the absorption was much better, except for right in here. Varying rates of absorption. I don't know if this paper has an actual coating on it or not, but here's pretty good absorption. This is a technical book, and I was just looking for a way to alter it so that I could use it more often without having to cover up all these diagrams. It looks like I'm still going to have to cover them up. All these green dyes are with the food coloring and water, and this is an actual dye bath as opposed to spraying. You could put it in a spray bottle and spray it if you wanted. Green paper that I bought, and all these papers are baby colors, and what I mean by that is they're a little on the pastel shade, but these are the tones that you would expect to see in a nursery or a young child's room. I don't have a lot of use for that color range, so I thought maybe dyeing the green paper would help. And as you can see, this is the actual green paper. It changed the texture as it did with other ones, picked up a little bit of blue here, but for the most part it darkened it a little bit, but it didn't change it enough for me to actually like it. What I can do is over dye this again and see what happens. So let's talk about how to formulate your alcohol ink dye and your food coloring dye. For our DIY alcohol ink, we need a pair of pliers to pull the guts and the nib out of this. We need alcohol. This is 70%. You can use as low as 50%. You need some children's markers, washable, soluble markers, and a funnel if you choose to keep things neat and tidy. And then these are our dies. I apologize for the horrible glare. So what I like to do is put some water in there, and I'm going to go get some water. 3/4 of a cup of water, and I'm just going to dump it in the pan because I want my paper to be a little bit wet to receive the dye. And because my table here is not quite level, it's all going to run to one side, but I just tip the pan a little bit and get the water at least as far back as I can. Now, the biggest deal about this is getting the cap off and getting this nib out. Comes right out. So then we're going to pull this whole thing through. We're going to drop the nib in, pick up the felt that was in the dye, drop that in, and then we're going to pour our alcohol in. How much? I pour enough to cover the nib, and you can see, maybe, that I left the previous nib in there. Now you can save your alcohol bottles if you get enough of them to store your dye in. Should we do this again? That's not quite a full bottle of alcohol, and it looks a little bit purpley. I'm wondering if this marker was supposed to be purple. Okay, now for our food coloring, I have 3/4 of a cup of water in here, and I've put 20 drops of food coloring, just water and food coloring, keeping in mind I've already put about a cup of water in this pan. So, and I've managed to level it out a little bit. So I'm just going to dump it in. I'm not going to mix it up, just going to dump it in.
And I am going to speed this way up because nobody's got time to watch me throw paper into a dye bath for 15 minutes. Here we go. Start out with just plain white paper, regular copy paper, not the cheap stuff that I've been limping along with. And let me just say, shipping has been a nightmare. And this was filmed the 3rd week in February because I knew it was going to take me a few days to dye and a few days to edit and whatnot and so forth. Nevertheless, it took me forever to get a ream of paper. People often ask, how do you get your papers so straight? Do you iron them? Do you drive them in the oven? How exactly do you do that? Well, the first and last rule is don't handle the paper. Now this is speeded up to 2.75-ish. And it looks like I'm handling the paper like crazy. I'm not. I get it in there as straight as I can. I pat it down so that the water will start to seep into the paper fibers, and I leave it alone. I flip it once, and then I pick it up and let the excess dye run off, and I put it over on the drying rack, which you can see on the left. That's it. Don't handle the paper. Now, earlier you heard me say that, I used a fan and that's how we got some ink pooling on one end, and that I never oven dry. Well, for this experiment, I decided to oven dry just to tell you what the results were. Now, I have heard people say most commonly to put it in at 200 degrees and watch it like a hawk. I have heard one person say she put it in at 400 degrees. I'm going to suggest to you that's not a wise idea. That's a fire hazard. I warmed my oven up to 200 degrees, and then I turned it down as low as it would go. It's an electric oven, so I'm not sure exactly what temperature it is, but I'm going to say probably about 170 is the lowest I can go in my oven. And took about an hour for the stack of papers to dry. There was a thicker stack and a thinner stack. The thicker stack was still damp in the center, and I got curling on the edges, which you will see in a second. So then I had this dye left over, and I decided that I would just throw caution to the wind and do something weird. I got out the blue food coloring and just put in 3 different places. I put in maybe 2 drops in each spot.
All right, the only thing we haven't tried now is our alcohol spray dyeing. So what I've done is I've sprayed down my pan. There's still some green ink in there. Not too worried about it. And what I'm going to do is spray some blue and spray some green.
So I alternated between spraying some alcohol inks and then wetting the back with just plain water so that the fibers of the paper would open up and receive the dye. All of the dyes that I've done for this episode are pastel to mid-tone pastel because I don't want dark papers. So you're going to see in a couple of minutes, as I've sped this up, that they're all kind of the same color value, even though they're different colors. And I wanted to add that this is my preferred way of paper dyeing because it is so fast. The dip dyeing of food coloring and water took 15 minutes plus an hour or so dry time plus another 5 or 10 minutes to get the sheets all pressed in a book, and then however long they stayed in the book. This is, because it's alcohol, it takes almost no time. It took me 6 minutes to do what I'm showing you here.
Here is our red. I'm trying this with natural light, and you can see that we got pinks, pretty intense pink, but mostly pastel pinks from the doilies. The papers themselves went from light to dark, and anywhere that the drying rack was hitting, it created a resist, which is what happens with the striping. These were dried in the oven, and you can see, even though there was no fan on them, the dye drifted anyway. So I won't be doing oven drying personally. I'm not in that big of a hurry, and right now I have so much pink, I don't know what to do with it. This is the back side of that. At the end of the red or pink dye bath, when I threw in blue, I got this pretty plummy color, and I love this color, even though it's kind of pale. Okay, so here it is on paper. Again, anywhere that the paper was hitting the drying rack, it was creating, oh, here we go. Here's where there was a doily on there. That corner would be a nice corner to use, but this in general, anywhere it hit the drying rack, it created stripes, which I kind of like. And here, this is the most intense one, and it pooled up. There must have been a doily here, because this all pooled up and gave me quite a few shades of pink to that plummy purple, but on the back it didn't seep in very much. One you just saw me do with alcohol ink. Again, these are pastels because I want them to be pastels. This one came out kind of mint green. Then we have a little more intense green, and it pooled a little bit here too. We have the green and blue, which is very subtle, but this is the way I want my papers. It's blue on this side, but it's green and blue on this side because this is the side
camera went out of focus. I'm so glad that I started it in late February so that it got finished and uploaded on time. Next week, something much less stressful, but it might be a little baffling to you by what you see. Take your screenshot you'll need the usual tools and materials, but you're going to add to that 3 or 4 sheets of black cardstock and some heavy black thread, either coat thread or embroidery floss. And these materials are going into your permanent stash. Keeping in mind, we are still trying to shop at the dollar store. Cardstock might not be had at the dollar store, and you might have to order it from Amazon. If so, and your cardstock doesn't get in on time, like my copy paper almost didn't, don't worry about it. It's going to be a very quick and easy project. Join us anyway, and then you'll be able to get it done in probably a morning or an afternoon. Thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. We are in under 18 minutes, just barely. God bless you. I'll see you real soon.